Thank you, Derek. Thank you for joining us for the DC Blockchain Summit. This is our 7th one. We tried to do 9, but they closed us down during COVID, so 9 years, but 7 actual events.
Okay, if you count base 9, it's 72, so.
Yeah, DC math.
There you go.
Yeah,
exactly.
Everything makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And you've been to some of our early events. Bill, you're one of actually the first people I met in this industry when we first started the chamber. Right. We'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary in July. So I've had the opportunity to see you and Abra grow and change and mature and thrive and survive through all of the the insanity that is the digital asset space. But you guys have recently started a new kind of division of Abra, the Abra-Privates, which is a really interesting way to innovate and build and offer regulated crypto products in the United States. You guys just announced this a couple weeks ago, but share kind of the intro of that, and then let's talk about kind of since the launch what's happened.
Sure. So we historically have been a provider of, now we used to call it crypto banking services, and then we got educated that certain people have a monopoly on the phrase. So we stopped calling it that and basically lawyered up and survived. To your comments, it feels like crypto, when you're in the trenches, has become a game of attrition. And if you've been in the space for more than 5 years, that is. And so we basically had, were witness to every single competitor in our space basically die. Anybody that was paying yield, that was providing lending services, or any combination of them, they're all gone. If they were in the C5 bucket versus DeFi, which I'll talk about the distinction in a second for us. And we survived for a few reasons. We had losses, which we actually went on and tweeted from a lending, on the lending side of the business, and we dealt with that. But we retooled and dug in and said, okay, if we can't use a trust or some other banking means to do this, pay yields, provide lending, and our clients want it, and when we wound down the yield and lending services, we actually gave back over $1 billion, which was in a few weeks, which was really painful. And basically, like I said, went back to the drawing board and said, okay, our clients want this. Their biggest complaint by far, like, as a matter of fact, I think it was like probably 95% was, I don't want this crypto back. We trust you. You're making me take this crypto back. And they're like, what's a deposit address? and so, all right, well, that's a problem. And so, nevertheless, we spent about a year, maybe a year and a half, working with our securities lawyers, other banking lawyers, and came up with a model which, on the surface, makes a lot of sense, but is extremely difficult to implement. So if you work in the securities world, registered investment advisor world, you're very familiar with this concept of separately managed accounts. And they're very common in equities. They manage probably 15 trillion or more in assets for high net worth individuals in the equities world. And they do exist in crypto, generally for custody, and there's a reason for that. But we figured out how to basically offer separately managed accounts, which more or less amount to like a vault for individual clients, so that the client retains title to the assets. In the CeFi world, with all the contagion that everyone had, all the assets were being pooled together. So in other words, if you deposited Bitcoin to earn yield, your Bitcoin would be commingled with my Bitcoin, which is what a bank does, right? You become a liability on the bank's balance sheet. And so the question was, how can we do this and not make the depositor a liability on our balance sheet? Well, you don't make them a depositor, you allow them to maintain title to the assets, and that's what this vault concept does. You retain title to the crypto. Okay, so that's part one, great, we can solve that problem, which is kind of the definition of part of the definition of having an SMA. Part two says, well, they want to earn yield, they want to stake their Ethereum, stake their Solana, Bitcoin, and they want to borrow against the Bitcoin Ethereum holdings, right? Because as the Bitcoin is going up in price, you want to hold the appreciating asset and you want to borrow in the dollar, which is the depreciating asset. And which is exactly what a prime broker does. If anybody's a client of Goldman or Morgan Stanley, they do that for years for high net worth clients. You borrow against your Apple shares. And so now we've extended the SMA model to be able to work at DeFi. So we can give clients direct access to DeFi networks while still allowing them to retain title to their assets. And so what that means is they're earning yield, but they're not pooling the assets. They're they're being directly deployed into DeFi smart contracts to borrow, earn yield, stake, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe that we're the first and/or only company in the U.S. that has been able to build this. It was a complete rebuild of our entire infrastructure, which took many, many months. And again, a lot of go-arounds with lawyers and the SEC to get the registration correct and done.
Well, let's talk about the regulatory path from the tech stack. You had to rebuild and to be able to bring this, but also it has probably just as much work, maybe more, to go through the regulatory path. So can you talk about how you were able to work through the SEC framework, given that so few companies have been successful?
Yeah, the RIA framework is very straightforward. There are other RIAs in crypto space in the US. That wasn't really that hard to understand. The hardest part was understanding, okay, how can you offer yield and still meet the qualified custodian rules?
Right.
Or at least the pending qualified custodian rules, which we believe will become rules. And so we basically assumed that we were going to have to do that, whether the rules have been instantiated or not. And so that was the hard part. And so we dug in, and it's kind of like saying if you have 1 million clients, all who want to earn yield, you're doing 1 million individual deployments, as opposed to pooling all the assets and doing one deployment. That's in a simplified manner the challenge of doing this. And we figured it out. So that was really the hard part. And then, actually, there were multiple hard parts. This probably just as hard was explaining this in detail between the technical product managers and the securities lawyers who didn't know how to spell DeFi, basically, and more or less getting them on the same page as to what this does. And I had a lot of first principle conversations. I've been fighting encryption wars and dealing with free speech issues since the 90s. I was at Netscape. I was part of the team that created SSL, dealt with the export rules, dealt with PGP, dealt with France trying to ban SSL, and so basically had probably 20 first principle discussions going back to the basics on custody versus self-custody and how all this works, and kind of leading people to the trough to kind of get there.
On the tech side, can you talk about a little bit what the distinction between Abra and Abra-Privates and the difference between just going to a crypto exchange like a Coinbase or a Kraken?
Sure. On an exchange, if you're not a trader, you shouldn't be doing custody on an exchange, first of all, right? Because you have all kinds of security issues. Most people don't know how to use 2FA correctly. But most importantly, you're a liability on the exchange's balance sheet. And if you were using FTX, Voyager, BlockFi, Celsius, Gemini Yield, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you're still waiting to get your assets back. Okay. Whereas in the model I'm describing,
Mt. Gox still
Mt.
too.
Gox, which is like, what is that, 9 years?
Still talking about Mt. Gox.
I think that happened before your first summit, right? Just
that
to put
was
it
2013.
Right.
Like it's
right.
Still...
So the point being that in a model where you retain title to the assets, by definition, of course, you're not a liability on my balance sheet at that point. So if I go away or some other company goes away, you're still retaining title to the assets, which means you get your assets back. To implement that, we use what's called the multi-party computation wallet, which is kind of like a generic version of multisig, which transcends all the asset types, not just Bitcoin, so that we can do it for Ethereum, Solana, et cetera, et cetera. And that basically gives you, again, a very clear distinction from how an exchange would work. And again, I think people should be in the mindset of using crypto exchanges ephemerally. Do your trade. If you're a trader, that's fine. You can stay. If not, get out. Right? Either if you don't want to use a wealth management service like Abra, learn cold storage. But most people are not in a position right now to do that. And this is as close as you can get to the cold storage model and still retain title to your own stuff.
Can we talk about multi-sig? Because that's an important part of how your technology works. multi-sig was pioneered by an early crypto company called BitGo. The idea was, 3 keys. You split the keys. There's 3 parties to the keys. And many companies have operationalized this and commercialized this in a lot of different ways. Can you talk a little bit about how it works, how the security works on your platform?
Sure. So there's 2 differing technologies to secure assets across in crypto across multiple parties, right? So this all comes back to this idea of public versus private cryptography. Traditionally, in private key cryptography, there's 2 keys, right? The private key that you use to sign a message, and a public key to basically validate that the message was signed by the private key. However, you can actually create this in a way where you have multiple signers, and that can be done in different ways. And so Bitcoin actually has embedded in it multi-sig capabilities, which would allow basically for any two of 3 people to sign a message, or any 2 of 3 people to be able to sign to read a message, back and forth. So multi-party computation, which Fireblocks is probably the biggest provider of, took that, also a technology, I think it was created in the 70s, which basically, instead of embedding multi-sig inside Bitcoin, which is where it is, they basically put a wrapper around all crypto, or any information for that matter. It could be Word doc, PowerPoint doc, or crypto, it doesn't matter, and basically allows you to kind of shard or distribute the keys across multiple parties, which is why it's called multi-party computation. And what that does is that basically says, okay, I can distribute the keys in lots of different places, and I can create rules, right, about who can access based upon, how many keys I want to have used. Is it 1 key? Okay, well, here's my 1 key, here's my backup, at some third party, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can basically use those rules to determine how to access this. And we use those rules to basically give people title to their stuff so that they actually have the keys.
Yeah, the security model is absolutely critical anytime you're using any type of crypto application, and it's important to do your own vetting.
Yep.
There's a lot of great services out there. There's a lot of not so great services out there, which is where regulation should come in. As we're having we just heard from FinCEN and their thoughts and remarks on DeFi and the need for certain types of controls. But the biggest crypto scandals, the biggest places where people and consumers, investors have lost money, the regulators were absolutely nowhere to be found. The last time I saw you was in Dubai. So just last month, we both attended a very large crypto event where regulators from all around the world had came, but also we had the opportunity to meet and hear from regulators from the UAE, and it's extremely impressive how deep the regulators are in the Middle East, in Asia, not so much here. But regulatory bodies, multiple regulatory bodies who have really pressed in, they understand how the technology works, and they are regulating digital asset financial services businesses. So, as a CEO in a global technology ecosystem, can you talk a little bit about why regulators must take into account that this is a global technology, it's digital, and what needs to happen here for us to be successful?
So it's a little bit of the government having an innovator's dilemma problem, insofar that the dollar hegemony gives us almost too much to protect when it comes to innovation.
Exorbitant privilege.
I think that, having spent a lot of time talking to governments around the world, and including the UAE governments, both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they genuinely believe that Dubai has the chance to surpass New York and London as the financial center of the future starting in 2040, whenever it is, and they're thinking that far out. And when you understand on the ground what's happening, and you go there, if you were there 20 years ago and you're there today, and you look at what their plans are for 20 years from now, you're like, yeah,
they did what they said they were going to do in the past
decade. And if you believe that they're going to do what they say that they're going to do now, they have a real chance. And so they're looking, to your point, they're looking at the rules not from the perspective of, or not just from the perspective of what's best for innovators and developers and entrepreneurs. No, we want to be the financial center of the future. Full stop. What do we have to do to enable that? And let's work backwards from that. That's the mindset. That's the mentality, right? I've had discussions with them on first principles, free speech. they get it. They mostly agree, but they're really not focusing on it from that perspective.
Right.
It's more like we think we can be the capital of the new financial world, and the U.S. seems to be asleep at the wheel on this idea.
They're courting all sorts of businesses.
Correct.
I mean, they roll out the red carpet.
Correct.
Literally, you walk down a red carpet.
Yes.
With like the prince and
yeah, and it's not to say that we have it completely wrong and they have it completely right, but they have a goal, right? And I have to ask myself, okay, what's our goal here? First principles right now,
yeah.
from a a nationalistic perspective, and it's not clear to me that we actually have one. For me as an entrepreneur, I just want to basically be in a position to give my customers what they want and have clear rules to give my customers what they want. And we've been able, in some cases through attrition, in some cases through, very, very smart lawyers, been able to create a path now to be able to do that. But it costs millions of dollars.
Yeah.
The startups that I talk to in UAE are not spending millions of dollars to find a clear path to get in business. They are lawyering up and doing the right things per the comments from the last speaker, but it's with a very, very clear set of guidelines on how to do it based upon which check marks you're checking in your world.
I feel like the bar is so low at this point. It's like just basic rules to the road, and it seems in my conversations with so many different people in the industry, so many companies are like, we will work with you. We will absolutely work with you.
Yeah, we have. Look, I think at Abra we have an advantage now because of this game of attrition. The way we have so many law firms working for us, with the RA model we've created and going deep on the custody rules, and our prime business has its own, set of rules to operate under. I don't want us to win and be successful just because of regulatory capture, but unfortunately, I can't. The board says, is that an advantage right now? And I say, yes, it is. I don't want it to be.
That's not how it should be.
It's not how,
right.
Yeah, that's better said. It's not how it should be. Exactly.
Today, in 2024,
but
when
it
you've
is.
been building for 10 years.
100%. And so I don't have an answer. I don't have a good answer / solution for that, except we have to start undoing. I talk to people from outside the U.S. who are trying to do business here. They genuinely think we have 4 branches of government.
Yeah.
And I try to explain to them that regulators are not an official branch of government. They operate within the 3 branches depending upon how they were set up. And the checks and balances of that system are meant to basically apply to all of that. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I've had that genuinely had that conversation where you educate people. And so, we I don't know. I think we've lost the plot a little bit. But I think it's not that hard if we really have the fortitude to go back and kind of unwind just a little bit and start from these first principles to create a paved road for everyone.
Right, and obviously our goals, our vision for the United States is going to be very different than anywhere in the world. And what really brings us all together as Americans are our first principles, which I would 100%. Argue are life, liberty, and property, or digital property as we're talking about.
Yep.
Digital assets. Can you talk about how the things you are seeing in crypto regulation, how they're addressing enforcement actions in this space, are jeopardizing some of our basic rights and liberties as Americans? Do you think they're going too far?
I've been having this conversation for 40 years. I mean, literally since I was, 18. I was working for the government when they started going after Phil Zimmerman with PGP, and then they eventually put the source code on a T-shirt and made it clear to everyone that it's protected free speech. At Netscape, we had 2 versions of the browser, one that was domestic and one that was hackable that you could crack that we sent out, and France wanted to ban SSL, so I got on a plane and tried to basically convince them that was silly, and they said, well, having an export version of the browser is more silly, and they were right. And so eventually, ITAR capitulated and realized, it was more or less the same discussion as PGP. Of course, in '99 we had Bernstein, which the Ninth Circuit clearly ruled that his source code for his encryption software, he was a math professor, was protected free speech, and we kind of use that as the gold standard now in terms of computer code being protected free speech. So I don't necessarily have a huge problem with the basics of AML laws. I think that's fine. We all kind of understand, money transmission and money laundering laws now, and that's fine. I think the first principal issues that I have a problem with are, why were these developers arrested in Holland and not here? Well, the answer is very clear, right? Mm-hmm. They never would have been triable here on free speech grounds, right? So that's very concerning to me, right? And so, I do think that we can unwind a little bit and create clearer guidelines and have a smooth paved road from these first principles, and then allow the checks and balances to work, right? Coinbase is able to fight some of these ideas that, staking is a security, it's not a security, and spend millions of dollars having that fight. No one else can afford that. If you're a 4-person startup that wants to basically get into the world of providing staking services, it's impossible right now, because you can't afford the cost to lawyer up to figure out what you can and can't do and then navigate appropriately. And that's very unfortunate, because it's demotivating a lot of developers who are trying to decide, where to spend their time.
Yeah, I agree.
Or should they spend their time outside the US doing it, which is what a lot of them are choosing to do.
And that's a conversation I'm having more every day. I mean, a lot of our members have just packed up and they're out. But we're glad you're still here. Thank you for your support. Please help me in joining and thanking Bill for joining us today.
Thanks. Have a great day.